I treat people with anxiety disorder. They have a propensity to remain dominant by the animal realm, you can say. And people that are classically traumatized or have a very deep pathology might be more predisposed to remain in the hell realm, one could say. So this is just a psychological lens of looking at this material. It's just one lens. I'm not saying it's more accurate, okay? So I don't get emails and things like that. Okay, and then like Rabina emailing me or something. Then on the last concentric circle is what's called the 12 links of dependent origination, which is Buddha's classic treatise on the fact that nothing is random, everything is being caused, and there's no singular cause. One thing leads to the next, leads to the next. This is the domino effect, okay? But because it's a domino effect, if you interrupt one domino, what happens to the rest of them? If you interrupt one domino, what happens to the rest of them? Yeah. So that is both the daunting prospect of your mind and also the most empowering teaching that you can imagine, because it's basically suggesting that the reason that you experience these states is because of something that you're doing or not doing, because of unconsciousness. But the empowering part is if you have consciousness, you can interrupt the cycle and you can break the cycle. Next slide. Can anyone see this? Can you see the letters here? These are some different translations, so don't show this to Rabina, okay? Okay, so one thing I want to just point out about this slide is it shows the continuity over time. So you have a time element to this chart. You can say that the blue section of the pie is the past life. And if you don't like past life cosmology, then you can just say the past. Could be childhood, for example. Or it could be ancestry or hereditary. Hereditary? No. Or ancestral. Something like that. You can say DNA is coming. You can say narrative is coming. Like if your parents were a Holocaust survivor, you may be the inheritor of a particular kind of stance or narrative. And then that narrative then conditions your mind, and then that's how you receive the world based on that narrative. There's a continuity over lifetimes. Even in Western culture, we accept that. Biological determining factors in your DNA and epigenetics can be switched on in a present life. So that's another understanding of how the past is informing the present. So the blue section of the pie is the past. What we call this? What we call green? What is that? What color? Huh? Light, teal. What is it? Okay, the green color is the present. Okay, and then so that's right now. That's happening either in this life, and then the yellow is the future. Okay, so we have our continuity over time in the graph. So what are we coming in with? There are the first two links of the past have to do with unconsciousness. We're coming in with a heavy amount of unconsciousness, misunderstanding. And then we have imprints. So imprints are tendencies, ways, memes, predispositions, associations, memories, narratives, these kinds of things, almost like your consciousness is like wet clay and you make an indentation and it hardens. So those come from childhood, many imprints from childhood. If you want to go further in childhood, you can say evolution gives us certain kinds of imprints, right? If we walk into a dark room and we see a coil, evolution has already imprinted us with a self-protective mechanism, right? The childhood version of that is if my father was an alcoholic and beat me or whatever, then when I'm on the subway system in New York City late night and someone is very drunk and loud, I will have a traumatic response to that, which does happen. Then you have the next links, okay? So because of unconsciousness and imprints, then we have a diffuse level of consciousness. Okay, that's a level of consciousness that is scattered. And we have a primitive self-construct, so your sense of self is very tenuous and myopic. And you have distorted sense perceptions. So the inputs that are coming in from the environment are being received, hearing, sight, taste, touch. What is receiving them are prior associations. I call these like waiting at the door to receive guests. They don't come in unfiltered, they come in filtered. So your sense perceptions are being filtered by prior associations. So your traumatic imprints are coloring your consciousness and your sense perceptions. This is how the domino effect is happening. So all the way through, up until initial contact, is conditioning. Unconsciousness, imprints, self-perceptions, senses. Then comes the moment of contact. So the moment of contact is when a sound hits your ear. That is considered a moment of contact. When a visual object hits your eye, that is a moment of contact. A sense object touches your skin, that's like a moment of contact. Smell hits your nose, contact. Okay? On the basis of contact, so we are right here now. On the basis of contact, you have your first level of reaction, which is a hedonic tone, a feeling tone. So something pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral happens on the basis of contact. Now that is where we would say you have your first initial physical reaction. And the next one, though, we would have our first emotional reaction. So how do we usually respond to something pleasant? Yeah, so that's where you have that clinging or grasping. Something unpleasant, pushing away, and something neutral, get bored or distracted. Huh? So this is contact, sensation is automatic. Then you have your afflictive reaction. So that's where you, on the basis of enjoying something, you want to hold on to the enjoyment, right? So contact, sensation, pain, pleasure, neutral, this is where you have your urge to push away. I like the translation urge here. Sometimes it's called clinging, and to me that instantly reminds me of going after something. But urge, you can have the urge to run and you can have the urge to grasp, right? So urge is more, I think, more practical translation of this link. You have your hedonic tone, your pain, pleasure, neutral, then you have an urge. And then what's the activity that you urge to do? That becomes a behavioral pattern. You do the behavioral pattern once or twice. If you do any behavioral pattern once, twice, 3 times, what happens after the 3rd or 4th time? Becomes more dramatic? Automatic, yes. And who does it become automatic to? It becomes part of you, right? So automatic behaviors then become part of your self-identity. That's what's happening in this link, the bhavana, the becoming. Bhavana means to become. So the things that you do, you become. If you do them once, twice, by the 3rd time, you're not thinking about them, they become automatic. What that means is your wiring, then, that they are adopted by your program, your wiring. That thus concludes a cycle in the present moment. That's all happening in one split moment. Then what you become influences what will happen in the next moment. And the whole thing starts again. You have your adaptation and you have death. So you have like another you in the next moment and the dying of you in the next moment. How many of you felt like you have died and been reborn already in this life? Anybody? How many of you like kick smoking? Anybody? Or kicked a nasty habit, right? So some part of you died and then some part of you was reborn, right? So that's happening in a future moment. And the part of you that's reborn as a result of your new habit then starts another cycle. Next, any questions? Okay, next slide. Next one. This is what happens when you have talent. This is obviously not my slide. Somebody got creative. I just like this slide, but let's move it forward. Okay, so actually go back to, sorry. One more. Yeah, back and back again. Okay, so your meditation practice is obviously concerned with the present moment in order to impact the future. Your mindfulness practice, your secular mindfulness practice. Okay, but it really is mostly focused on contact, sensation, urge, and action. Everybody say it. Contact, sensation, urge, and action. That is taking the full spectrum of past, present, and future and getting very, very focused on the links that you need to pay attention to in any given moment of your meditation practice. You would focus on links, contact, sensation, urge, and action. If you can get very specific with your attention, with your meditation practice on those links, then you will find what is called the gap. Next one. So next one again, and the next one again. Okay, here they are. Links 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. What the Buddha discovered about any cycle is if you can find the weakness of the link and break the link, then the cycle stops. So you can break a cycle at any of the 12 links. You can break it at any, so people are going, well, can you do it over here? Yes, you can do it anywhere. But the Buddha suggested that the most convenient, easy access one is between sensation and emotion, but sometimes between emotion and action, okay? Either here or here. Initial contact, karmic sensation, urge, action. So either break it at the urge or break it at the action. Before the urge or before the action. Actually, if we're more reasonable and we remember what it's like to first meditate, probably after the urge, but before the action is the best window. Does that make sense? Now, we also talked about karma this way, that karma is both the cause and the effect. The cause is an intention that creates an effect. The effect is a ripening that creates instantaneously another reaction, which is the seed for a future effect. Make sense? So you do something in the moment, but that you didn't just do anything in the moment, you're already responding to something. So yesterday's example, Sadia was saying, was it anger? Moment of anger? Can't remember either, but let's just say. So someone says something nasty and you feel a moment of anger. Is there anything that you can do about that anger? Did you create that anger? Is there anything you can do about it? Somebody bumps you and you feel angry. Anything you can do about it? It's happening because it is the result of a ripening effect. The story that I gave yesterday was that I was on the street with my mom. Remember that story? And there was a guy that was chastising me in the back, behind me, and I was feeling humiliated. And my mom was feeling like it was a joke. Okay, so we're both having different subjective experiences of the same event. And the ripening of our subjective experience has been caused. It has already been caused. And so maybe in the wheel of things, I already have imprints of somebody chastising me. And I already have lots of reinforcement reactivity to my shame and inadequacy and my humiliation and my powerlessness. And every time I feel powerless, I shut myself down. And I turn my aggression or my reactivity inwards. Okay? And then the next time I'm in a moment and somebody says something nasty to me, it's already waiting there as a sensitive, like, little wound that you're going to stick your salty thumb in. You follow? Right? So it's already been set up. So there's nothing I could have done about the moment where the words hit my ears and instantaneously it's unpleasant. And then I have an urge to lash out. Okay, so that's the initial contact is his unkind words. The sensation is, in my case, in this example, unpleasant sensation, right? So that's the karmic effect. Humiliation, unpleasant. Then the emotion, the urge. What's the urge? With my father, I want to react, but if I felt terrified of him. So my reaction then went inwards. So the urge to lash out then was reversed, and I would be cutting and burning myself. Okay? Is this too much information for you guys? Are you okay with this? Contact. This guy's chastising me on the street. Sensation, it's unpleasant because of the past conditioning of my own humiliation experiences. That's what's filtering those words that hit my ears, and the ripening effect of all my internal aggression is blossoming right there. Then the emotion is to lash out in some way. And then the action, in my case, I couldn't lash out, so I would retreat, isolation. Okay, so that's the urge, action, self-identification. You fill in the blank. How am I feeling once somebody's chastising me and I don't feel powerful enough to stand up for myself and I retreat? What's going on in my stewing and brewing in my isolation? Anybody fill in the gaps? I don't mind. They're usually something like I am statements. I am weak. Spineless. Yeah. Anything else? Hopeless. Vulnerable. So if you say that enough to yourself, what happens? You believe it, and when you believe it, you become it. So that's bhavana. That's what the Buddha meant by bhavana. We're constantly creating ourselves. So link 10 is bhavana. So that would be the completion in the present moment. And now bhavana sets you up for tomorrow, doesn't it? So today's Miles dies and tomorrow's Miles is affected. Birth and death, or death and birth. Birth and death. Okay, so we have our present. This is like now we're constricting the laboratory environment of your mindfulness meditation. But we are now putting it into the lens of karma theory. So this is karma theory, right? Is it that wacky, the way it's presented? It's mechanical enough for a Western-minded person. It's operationalized in a way, and it has been translated in a way so that you can get the gist. But just don't tell Rabina. Okay, next one. Okay, so this is another way of understanding it. They are a slight adaptation to the links I just presented. But the main misperception that I have about myself, we said, was I am weak. Okay, and then the emotion that's mostly produced on the basis of the belief that you're weak. What kind of emotion? Do we have any psychologists, clinical people, therapists in here? No. Maybe I should have asked that earlier. Huh? Shame, yeah. So shame and fear, okay? So my belief system, which is not arbitrary and random, it's coming from where? It's coming from the past. It's been conditioned already. It's already been imprinted, not only by childhood imprinting, but by evolution. I arrive on the scene. right? I have an event strikes me. It is filtered through my perceptual lens. My conditioning is receiving the data from the environment. It's being filtered. It triggers an old association, then I have a particular emotion, shame and fear. As a result of shame and fear, in my story that I just told you, what's the action? Retreat and self-harm, okay? If I retreat and I isolate and I beat myself up, how does the world respond to me? I perceive everybody as a threat, but how do you perceive me if I'm retreating? I'm odd. I'm a loser. Disconnected. How about I don't care? Oh, that bloke, he doesn't really care. He's always on his own. If you perceive that someone's always on their own and they don't care, what will become your relationship to them? Huh? You'll ignore them. You won't be bothered with them. Right? So somehow my own relationship, my own bhavana, then becomes a source of social conditioning. In other words, what I do ends up influencing how people respond to me. And this is how you get reinforcement contingencies in couples, reinforcement contingencies with family systems. We're not isolated. Not even what's happening in us is an isolated thing. We're also a dependent origination with others. And that dependent origination creates a system of reinforcement that keeps us stuck in our patterns. So if you're someone who's experienced abuse, the likelihood that you have become, blame yourself and accommodate to others, the likelihood that you're more attractive or more inclined to find a partner or stay with a partner that creates that internal environment, because the psyche is basically creating a homeostasis for itself. It wants to find what it's used to, even if what it finds is not pleasant. And then you reinforce and recapitulate childhood experiences with your current adult partner. For example, everybody follow? Right, so then you make excuses for your partner's alcoholic abuse or foul language or mistreatment of you, and you internalize it further as your own self-blame, and around and around and around and around we go, and that becomes so hardwired that you actually feel, this is life. There's no way out. This is what I am. This is how it goes. You're not even thinking that there's an alternative. Next slide. Now, between the platform and the train is called the, and what does the announcer say? Please mind the gap, which is what your point of your meditation practice is. Your point is not to calm down. Do you follow the difference? So we've already made our point. Let's go have lunch. Calming down is necessary. Being clear-minded is necessary. Slowing down the operational mechanism of the domino chain of events is necessary. Not so that you can feel better. This is the problem with a largely hedonic culture, where the main interest is in pleasure. Even if it's unpleasant and you have presence of mind, you can impact your situation when? Can you change the anger in the moment? Huh? You cannot change the anger in the moment. All you can do is change your relationship to it for when? For the future. So this is where the hard sell is. This is where the hard sell is. People want to come in and spend money and do a training, and they want to know that they're going to feel good. The hardest sell is to let them know that there's no quick fix for what you're experiencing, because it's already been planted and it must be experienced. And when you're experiencing it, the only thing that you can do is not change it in the moment, but change your relationship for it in a future moment. And you'd have to do it 100 times. Are we ready as a society for that? So You have your contact, anything you can do about your contact, nothing you can do about your contact, something's hitting you, sound, sight, touch, someone's words, sensations, nothing you can do, because that's the ripening effect of the past. That's when your associations fire. Gap in awareness, if you slow down your mindfulness and you're paying attention non-judgmentally, moment by moment, isn't that John Kabat-Zinn's classic definition? Non-judgmental awareness, moment by moment. Okay, these are the moments, and especially in the body, and especially to the hedonic tone. This happened. Because what happens when something unpleasant arises? The next domino is what? Urge, right? So usually sensation, urge, reaction, sensation, urge, reaction, sensation, urge, reaction, sensation, urge, reaction. That's the unconscious life. That's samsara. Sensation, urge, action, sensation, urge, action. That means everything that you've been conditioned is just aimed at replication. Samsara, being trapped. Now we're slowing it down. Nothing you can do about contact, nothing you can do about sensation. That's the ripening effect. Moment of awareness. Now you can see the urge arise. But you can do what? You can resist the urge. You can resist the urge. And would that be enough? What else needs to happen? Yes, you have to choose to respond differently. This is where virtue is. Your recommendations that we went through of the 10 virtues, the recommendations that the Buddha gave about how to create the life that you want according to the karmic principles of the fourth principle or characteristic of karma, or the third one, knowing what you need to, having discernment about how you should act in order to create the world that you want. In the gap, you have two features. You have recognition and you have choice. Recognition, choice. Recognition, choice. In the automatic cycle, there's no recognition, there's no choice. It's being chosen for you by conditioning. So your meditation, your mindfulness is to provide recognition so that you can provide choice. Now, what are your choices? In my case, what would be useful for me if I have a moment of contact, aggression, or humiliation, and the urge for aggression? What is it that I need? What would be very beneficial in my karmic formation? What's the one thing that was probably missing? Affection. Love, tenderness, acceptance, something like that, something with that kind of flavor. Call it self-compassion, call it loving kindness, call it gentleness. That's an antidote, right? If I can suspend my reaction to the urge of aggression and include or choose loving kindness, will it take that feeling away in the moment? No. Hard sell. But if you have enough vision and trust in conditionality, in consequentiality, in causality, then depositing the seed of loving kindness will inevitably, because of the first principle of karma, have its effect. It's definitive. A lemon seed can only produce a lemon tree. Loving kindness can only produce a positive outcome. So not in the moment do you get the effect. In a future moment, you get an effect. You do get some effect. You do get some. You can get some. But in terms of reconditioning the self construct, because remember, it's urge, hedonic sensation, contact, hedonic sensation, urge, behavior, then what's that other one? Bhavana, self-construct. That's the one that we're trying to reshape. That's more like a temporary. It's just what you're experiencing right now is just a different kind of hedonic sensation. It's either pleasant or pleasure. So you can shift something and feel better We like that, don't we? You take an Advil or a Panadol. You call it Panadol here? Whatever. We like that. Or we like we give something nice to someone and there's a moment of feeling good or whatever. But it's temporary. It doesn't necessarily, the one in the moment doesn't necessarily reconfigure the self. The one that reconfigures the self is doing that habit over and over and over and over and over again. So that, the one time of loving kindness may or may not feel good, right? But the loving kindness over a long stretch make you feel more open-hearted, make you feel more secure, something like that. Something like that. Next slide. What else do we have here? Okay, this is just the same thing with the gap, but just more different visual. So what if I have I'm worthy, and I have on the basis of my meditation practice, I have a calm enough state of mind to have recognition and choice, and I'm putting loving kindness into my behavioral repertoire. And then how would I respond? How would I, instead of isolation, what might it be? Connection. I might call a friend or call my wife or talk to somebody about my experience. And if I talked with vulnerability to someone about my experience and they were a decent person because I was more selective about the partners, what kind of reinforcement, social reinforcement contingency might I set up? Somebody for the first time in my life could do what? They could mirror me appropriately. They could validate my feeling. They could act as an auxiliary nervous system to help recalibrate my nervous system. They could make me feel safe, for example. Their mirror neurons, instead of making me feel judged and humiliated, I could feel the tenderness in their eyes. And then that would then come and reinforce my belief about myself, that I'm actually okay or worthy or lovable or whatever. Okay, the wisdom piece is that there is eventually a recognition that the self-states of becoming are very transitory. Okay, so there's a level of flexibility that's being established in a very subtle way throughout this whole process. So even if you have temporary moments where you're constricted, you don't necessarily see that that's you anymore, so that you can survive periods of being in distress. Now that's very subtle and very profound. That's a hard thing to teach a client, for example. You can teach a client a behavioral intervention, which is why the Buddha, I think, started with the gap where it was. He's starting with urges and actions. They're the most concrete things to get a leverage in. I feel this way. Can you hold how you feel for a second, and can you act differently? If you have an urge for alcohol, they teach you in the 12-step program to make a phone call instead of going to the pub. Right? But what's the self in there is, I feel humiliated. That is a very subtle thing. But if you train your awareness to have recognition about how transitory you feel, you become less inclined to grasp at your sense of identity, so that you can survive states. You can even feel unpleasant states and go, this is just a feeling, this is not me. Now that's a very profound thing to train an adolescent, for example. Because you remember those years in, you call it high school here or no? You call it, what do you call it here? Huh? High school. Do you remember how horrible high school was? Or was it just horrible for me? Was that my karma? I mean, there's usually a large amount of social stress when you're in adolescence because your self isn't that well formed that it doesn't have the tolerance or endurance to deal with all the cattiness and the clickiness and the judgment that adolescents have. They're filled with impulses, and some of them are cheeky and mean and unkind. And your sense of self-esteem is so tenuous that those periods of life can be really challenging and difficult. But it's a worthwhile strategy to teach someone to have the ability to cope and tolerate states of distress, not and reach for the panacea to take that away, but hold it without reifying some sense of self-perception. Because what happens in those adolescent periods is that there's a concretization about your sense of worth as a result of all the feelings that you're having. If you're constantly feeling less than, it's conceivable that your sense of self consolidates itself around a sense of incompetence, worthlessness. Next slide. Okay, what do we have here? Next. Let me see what else. Okay, and keep going. We covered some of these yesterday. Remember, I was talking about different domains of karma, that it's not all karma. Your mind isn't creating the tsunami. These are the ones that we found in the text of the different domains of karma, the environmental cause, the biological causes. This is the one, these two are the ones that would most probably be considered the ones, from our point of view, that the Buddha is talking about when he talks about karma, mental and intentional karma, that creates subjective experience. Next one. Okay, I think we're getting the flavor of this, right? Maybe we can just finish the last 5 minutes with any comments and discussion about it. What's the last remaining slides, just out of curiosity? What do you think? You get the picture, right? That's not coming out of a random occurrence. Keep going. Okay, cheers to you. Okay, this is just a review. We've done this. This is too technical. I think we're good. You can close the PowerPoint down. Or keep it at a nice photograph or something. Okay, yeah, that's good. So comments, your reflections. Yeah.
I think the gap and all of that, I think, requires a lot of patience, which I think a lot of people don't have. I feel like for the last years I've been working on that in my meditation, and there's so many moments where I fall back and then I say, okay, get up again, and then I know, and this recognition that, okay, here it is in that moment, and recognize in that moment. I mean, that already has taken years to get to that point of recognizing, and then also then saying, okay, now I have a choice. Doesn't always happen, but when it does happen, it's like, oh, good, you recognize it. But when I fall back, I then later look at it and say, okay, you didn't recognize it and you didn't take a choice. You just did what is habit.
Yeah.
What is your habit?
Yeah.
So I realized that sometimes I wanted to just give up and say, no, I can't do this.
Yeah.
And then I say, no, just keep doing it. Just keep doing it and be patient with
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
And with everyone around you too, but be patient with yourself, and eventually maybe you'll get there. So that it doesn't happen as often as it used to. Like your situation, your example, for instance.
Yeah, I think that patience is really important. We want quick results. We really do.
I might add, it's like also knowing this and not being able to do it puts another cause of you feeling bad with yourself, another shame, on top of what you already.
Yeah.
Does that need to come from, it's almost like you need like a little experience of having had that self-compassion and love from somewhere. If you've never had that, like say kids who have had like unbelievable neglect or abuse,
Yeah.
where do they learn that from?
That's right. That's exactly right. So this goes down to our Friday night conversation about what is the qualities and purpose of a guru. And I was saying that if you look at it through the analytic lens, the guru is a kind of mirror. And because you have such a distorted self-perception, seeing yourself through the eyes of another is how children develop their own self-esteem. But if you get attached to the mirror, then you're constantly just reenacting a dependence. It may be a better mirror, but you failed to do the integration, which is what a real maturity is supposed to do. So the Lama I'm not suggesting the Lama's real purpose is to be a surrogate, but what I was trying to set up in that conversation was to show that with our own Western neurotic dysfunction, the breakdown in family systems and the resultant fragmentation of attachment, some of us are coming to the spiritual centers and relating to the Lamas from a real psychological deficit of attachment security. And we are unconsciously projecting on the Lama the kind of attachment figures that we fantasize we wish we could have. And in a way, that's okay. It's like we shouldn't shun that. We should just understand we're like broken people and wounded people and injured children and fragmented societies, and we have these developmental needs that may need to be addressed before we really start to do the high road of the selflessness work and the altruistic work, the bodhicitta and the wisdom. So part of the renunciative path may include a long period of investment in self-care. And it is important to have better parents and better communities around us. The Lama smiles at you and treats you non-judgmentally and has a sort of affection for you. You can get a little dose of what you need. The problem is if you fail to integrate that as your birthright and inherent to you, and feel along the way that you're maturing, you just get into a dose response where you're dependent on the Lama to give you that feeling. If you don't recognize that that feeling's actually coming from you, if you don't start to see, oh, well, in a way, I mean, this is, it's hypocrisy, but in a way, I'm not that different from the Dalai Lama. I'll fucking say it. Like I will. It's true. If you continue going, oh, well, he's up there and I'm down here, then you're just putting yourself in a position to actually be more distant from actualizing your potential. You've externalized and created too much distance between you and your own potential. But if you say something like, realistically, he's had much more actualization than I have had right now, and I admire him and I admire his way of being, but along the way, I'm feeling like it is possible. I'm taking in this goodness and I am feeling it is possible for me. Then at a certain point, you don't actually need the Lamas that much. And they can then just serve their purpose, which is to teach and inspire. They're not there to hold your hand. But I guess some of us need some hand-holding. I think we really do. Like we haven't had the very basic threshold of experiences in our society and our family systems to even start out on the spiritual process with enough resources. We have to kind of say that about our culture. And I don't want to confuse Dharma with therapy, but in a way, they need to work together somehow. Because that's just sort of our circumstance. Yeah. Absolutely not. Rubbish. Rubbish. Yeah, I think listen, if you spend any amount of time in a spiritual community or in therapy and you've noticed how hard you're working on your mind and yet you go back to a partner or to a family system or to your culture at large that is refusing to take any responsibility, I personally think at some point, you have to disengage outwardly. But from a bodhicitta standpoint, never disengage internally. That is a middle way. A dysfunctional relationship that's causing you harm, you should try your best to influence positively the other person. If they show a lack of receptivity and a lack of responsibility and a lack of acknowledgement for their side in the contingency, then at some point, as an act of self-care for you, You should disengage from participating in that process because it's damaging to your mind. But you shouldn't do it out of malice, and you shouldn't do it out of judgment. You should do it out of care for yourself, and you should try your best to hold out care for them, but you shouldn't participate anymore in something that's dysfunctional. And then maybe it's not so clear-cut. Maybe you take respites, and then you try again. You know, maybe like every Christmas you try to have, or Thanksgiving, you have a little interaction with your folks to see if you can like sit there calmly and be available to them and like show them that you're doing well, but they're really not that interested in going any further or being any less grumpy or less judgmental or less, punitive or whatever. But there is something like, I've seen another kind of spiritual bypass where people who have high teachings on altruism actually stay too long in dysfunctional relationships because they think they're serving a higher purpose when actually they're eroding their merit and their goodwill and their self-worth. And people are not responding. But maybe you could be far more impactful with people who are receptive. When the Buddha gained enlightenment, he was not convinced that he should speak about his experience because he didn't think anybody would understand it. And there's not a metaphor, but it is said that he looked out into a lotus pond and he saw that most of the lotuses were underwater. A couple of them were about to breach the surface, and one stood out. Okay, and that story is typically used to indicate that even for one person, the Buddha decided to teach. But I use it as also recognize that there's very few people who are ready to hear. But you should concentrate your efforts on those that are ready to hear. And maybe you do a spattering of salt and pepper here and there to see if any of the seeds land. But staying in these toxic relationships when there's no receptivity, I don't think that's doing anyone any good. I think it actually is wearing you down. You have an over sense of responsibility. I think caregivers struggle from this. People that find themselves, the more empathic of us are the ones in our family system that were called in unconsciously to serve as the ambassador of goodwill for everybody else. And then we end up in adulthood serving that same capacity. The more gentler of us, the more empathic of us, are the caregivers, which is in a way a lovely thing, but in a way it has ensnared us like a fish in a net into dysfunctional relationships. So we have to have also not only love, but discernment. And what the discernment is an evaluation of someone else's ability to interact with us in a more productive way. Someone who's receptive to learn, you should pump as much attention into them as you can. Somebody who's reluctant to learn, you keep your heart moist, but you don't engage that much. And if your capacity is amazing, and it's not deteriorating you, maybe you can stay as long as you can with them. But if it's wearing and tearing you down, you're signing up or complicit in an abusive situation. That's not taking care of yourself. Maybe take one more? Yeah.
How does that apply to society at large? When you said, you could do the work and you come back to this relationship to society at large and see that it's not changing, it's not taking responsibility.
Yeah. Society is very dysfunctional right now. So, some of us, like I have gotten quite burned out, right? And so then maybe I am more receptive just to work in small pockets and work collaboratively with those people that are actually interested. Like, for example, if I really needed to take care of my children, I might have to sell a service or a product. And if I had to sell a service or a product, I'd have to talk about pleasure. So I might have 100 people here today if I was talking about the secret and how your mind could make you sexier and wealthier. It's not going to interest me, first and foremost, and I don't think it's the right thing to do for our society. It's just more of the same. So then I have to make a compromise and work with people who are receptive. And look, that's you guys. You sit through the cold for a message that's not all that savory, but there's some deeper calling in you, And I trust that all of you have integrated or will integrate this and actually make an impact in your small families or with your communities in your own way. Yeah. And then there's other people that are having bigger impact, like the Lama Zopa Rinpoches and the Tenzin Zopas and the Geshe Tashis. They're having a meaningful impact with bigger, and that's because of their merit. That's because of their virtue. You can see how virtue has made them magnets. Magnets. People are attracted to when they see something genuine. And they see there's no mirage there. They see there's no superficial marketing pitch or ploy. Let's dedicate the merit. Okay. So just imagine this morning beginning with our meditation and then going through karma and going through dependent origination, and by implicitly talking about dependent origination, also talking about emptiness. These are some of the most profound and virtuous activities that any human being can ever embark on or engage with. Sincerely, the engagement with dependent origination, karma theory, and emptiness is said to be the most meritorious activity of a human mind, because it is getting so close to the engine that drives reality and experience. And it is by this route, this course of inquiry, that liberation can be gained. And so think that together in the course of our reflection and our study, whatever mistakes I have made, whatever misinterpretations I have given, I accept, but try to think that some Dharma has been presented and our work together has created a vast amount of merit as a result. And then think that that merit could serve as the seed for a fruition of positive experience, but we actually earmark it for liberation. And not just for ourselves, but for others. And then if you want to be more specific, then start portioning out the merit, that you take a little piece for your own liberation, you give out a little piece for your teachers. May they be well and happy and have long life and continue serving their communities, continue impacting the planet positively. So His Holiness and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Geshe Tase Zering, and all the rest of them. A portion goes to your family, your children, your spouses, your partners, that they may be happy, that they may also find the true source of happiness and liberation. Even the difficult ones, even the neutral ones, all living beings, animals, plants, trees, oceans, forests, until the entire planet is brought back into harmony. Om Ahom. Thank you so much. Okay, have a nice lunch. Shall we do a little shorter lunch today? Because we'll have to shorten lunch a little bit. 1 hour and 15?
Yeah.
Is that reasonable?